Right. So we are back, and this is part two. Principle of individual responsibility, righteousness rewarded. And so we're going to look at Ezekiel again, but this time we're going to focus on chapter 18 with Ezekiel. Chapter 18, 1 through 9 is what we're going to use today in part two session. So remember, previously we were talking about Ezekiel, and Ezekiel was appointed by God to be a watchman over the people. Okay, that was his task. He was to be a watchman, a spiritual watchman over the people. And God gave him a message, all right? But God made sure that Ezekiel was muted until the right time. All right, and so now we're focusing on part two now, principle of individual responsibility, righteousness rewarded. So Ezekiel's hearers were in bondage and exile because of their sins as a nation. However, each one could individually choose to live righteously, even among unrighteous people. Sometimes people today excuse sin by saying, we live in a fallen world, or if our nation would only turn back to God. Some people blame their parents or others. It was just the way I was raised. But Ezekiel 18 reminds us that the responsibility for sins lies squarely on the individual in the way he or she chooses to live. All right. And so here people were making excuses for their behavior, for their actions. So let's look at the scripture here, Ezekiel the 18th chapter, the 1st through 9th. The word of the Lord came to me. What do you people mean by quoting this proverb about the land of Israel? The parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, you will no longer quote this proverb in Israel. For everyone belongs to me, the parents as well as the child. Both alike belong to me. The one who sins is the one who will die. Suppose there is a righteous man who does what is right, just and right. He does not eat at the mountain shrines or look to the idols of Israel. He does not defile his neighbor's wife or have sexual relations with a woman during her period. He does not oppress anyone, but returns what he took in pledge for a loan. He does not commit robbery, but gives his food to the hungry and provides clothing for the naked. He does not lend to them at interest or take a profit from them. He withholds his hand from doing wrong and judges fairly between two parties. He follows my decrees and faithfully keeps my laws. That man is righteous. He will surely live, declares the sovereign Lord. So moral responsibility here. So looking at Ezekiel, the 18th chapter, 1 through 9. So let's look at what is God really explaining here. What is he describing here or discussing here in this passage here? Okay. And so Ezekiel challenged an idea that was popular among the Judean exiles, the notion that they were suffering for the sins of their ancestors and not their own. This idea was summarized in a pithy proverb which said, the parents have eaten sour grapes, but their children's mouth pucker at the taste. Such an idea was not without foundation. The Torah itself stated that God lays the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. Indeed, the exile was a culmination of generations of rebellion and sinful choices. In the book of 2 Kings, the Lord responded to the sins of the wicked king Manasseh with an ominous threat. I will bring such disaster on Jerusalem and Judah that the ears of those who hear about it will tingle with horror. And even though Manasseh's grandson Josiah was perhaps the godliest of Judah's kings and conducted a thorough renewal of Judah's spiritual life, this will not change God's mind about the punishment he had sworn to send. Even so, the Lord was very angry with Judah because of all the wicked things Manasseh had done to provoke him. For the Lord says, I will also banish Judah from my presence, just as I have banished Israel, and I will reject my chosen city of Jerusalem and the temple where my name was to be honored. However, even though the exile was a corporate judgment brought on by the sins of multiple generations, this did not mean that the current generation was innocent or that they were suffering for the sins of others, not their own. Previous generations had sinned and angered the Lord, but this generation had added to their own sins to those who had gone before. Yet God also called Ezekiel to let them know that even in the midst of corporate punishment, he still offered the promise of life. God pledged to give life to the individual Israelite who rejected adultery, sexual immorality, injustice, and violence. In other words, each individual could choose to observe his commandments to follow him faithfully. We are all affected by the choices made by others, whether in our families or in a society at large. But this does not leave us hopeless, nor does this mean that God cannot bless us in spite of our ancestry or past experiences. Whatever our circumstances, salvation is always possible for those who respond in faith and obedience to the offer of life God extends through the good news of Jesus Christ. All right, so more responsibility. So here, the people were making excuses for their sins. Okay, that's their ancestors were worshiping idol gods. Their ancestors were living in, a sinful way, and they were making an excuse as to why they were continuing on doing it. They were like, well, our ancestors did it. That's my excuse for sinning. My ancestors did it, so that's why I'm doing it. Okay. And here God is trying to remind them too that just because your ancestor did it, that don't mean you have to do it. And that's just an excuse. Everybody's going to be held accountable for their own sins. And they were trying to use the Bible too as an excuse to like, well, God already said that he's going to punish me because what my great grandparents did years ago, he's going to punish me. That really wasn't what God was explaining in the text, because if you look at the historical background and at the time what was going on, then you have a better understanding of why God said what he said. Because during that time, when they were talking about the kings, a lot of the kings were the ones that caused their people to be rebellious against God. The king was the one causing people to break the covenant or break that agreement with the people. It was the kings, okay? And then when the king taught his child that, then the child would carry on what was taught to them, okay? And so lots of times you got generation after generation doing things because of that's what they were being taught. That's what they were being taught. But here in this situation with Massa, his grandson didn't do that. Josiah, no. And so that's what God is trying to get them to see, that if you know something is wrong, you don't have to continue on doing that. All right. You do not have to continue on doing that. All right. And so let's look at this question here. It says, how can people break the cycle of sin that plagues their family or culture? How can we break that cycle, those generational curses that many families are dealing with still today? Now, it could have been something, like I said, done with your great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents done, and y'all are still feeling the wrath of that. So how can we break that cycle? Breaking that cycle of generational curses, because it's happening. Okay. But one thing we got to keep in mind too, that we can break it. We can break that cycle of sin. So like, for example, there are some families that deal with alcoholics. Okay. It's like everybody in the family drinks. And when they drink, they drink. Okay. And then it's like, okay, who's going to break the cycle? Because it's wrong to act in that way. Who is going to break the cycle? Is it going to be you? And sometimes it can be you, to be that one person, to be that one individual to say, y'all, let's stop it. This is not right. We need to stop this. This is something that we need to work on. grandmama them used to do this, her parents them used to do this. We don't have to live like this. We don't have to do this. Okay, so it is on the responsibility of the individual to put a stop to these generational curses, these generational strongholds that are on some families. That we can do it. We can do it with Christ Jesus. Yes, we can do it. And I know that sometimes it's hard. You don't want your family to push you to the side, or maybe you feel like the outcast of the family because you don't do that. You don't behave in that type of way. Okay. But it's starting with you. Even if you are the outcast, that's fine. Be the outcast. Be that person to break that cycle, to break that plague. Because it got to start with somebody. It got to start somewhere. So if it starts with you, it just starts with you. And you just pray for God to give you strength, to give you comfort, to give you wisdom, to give you knowledge and understanding, strategies on how to cope with breaking the cycle here. Okay? Because it could be you. It could be you. So don't give up. You keep moving forward. You keep doing your thing. If they want to count you as the black sheep of the family, then so be it. So be it. But move forward, because when you move forward with God, you are a winner. You are a winner. And then lots of times you don't know, somebody might be watching you and you might have a positive influence on them to make them change their ways too. And they're like, okay, if so-and-so can change or so-and-so doesn't do this, I can do this too. Because you never know who is watching and what they are thinking about. So you can have a positive influence on them, a major impact on them to make them want to change their ways. Okay, you can. All right, because I've seen it happen. All right, I've seen it happen. All right, and so let's move forward now in looking at the next generation. All right, the next generation. And so here it focuses on Ezekiel, the 18th chapter again, but we're reading a little further now to the 10th through the 18th verse and looking at the next generation and what was to happen. So it says here, suppose he has a violent son who sheds blood or does any of these other things, though the father has done none of them. He eats at the mountain shrines. He defiles his neighbor's wife. He oppresses the poor and needy. He commits robbery. He does not return what he took in pledge. He looks to the idols. He does detestable things. He lends at interest and takes a profit. Will such a man live? He will not, because he has done all these detestable things. He is to be put to death. His blood would be on his own head. But suppose the son has a son who sees all the sin his father commits, and though he sees them, he does not do such things. He does not eat at the mountain shrines or look to the idols of Israel. He does not defile his neighbor's wife. He does not oppress anyone or require a pledge for a loan. He does not commit robbery, but gives his food to the hungry and provides clothing for the naked. He withholds his hand from mistreating the poor and takes no interest or profit from them. He keeps my laws and follows my decrees. He will not die for his father's sin. He will surely live. But his father will die for his own sin because he practiced extortion, robbed his brother, and did what was wrong among his people. So here God is reminding us that we are not held accountable for what grandmama, mom, dad, great grandmama, or grandfather did. We are not held accountable to that. We are held accountable to our own sins, not to theirs. Okay, but see, during this time, this was their excuse. This was their excuse. Well, so-and-so did it. My ancestors did it, But God is here reminding them that you all are going to be held accountable for your own personal sins. So while one can certainly live a Christian life by trusting God and turning from the sins of our ancestors and our culture, the opposite is also true. It is possible to be raised in a good Christian home and a healthy church environment and yet turn away. Okay, and yet turn away. And so we've seen when people come from a good background, raised correctly, and the child goes astray. And it's like, well, what happened? You know, you wasn't raised up like this. You didn't even be, around an environment like this. Okay. And so in Ezekiel, the 18th chapter, the 10th through the 18th, God reminded his people through Ezekiel that every individual in every generation makes a personal decision about serving or rebelling against God. Having righteous parents does not guarantee righteousness for the next generation, nor does having unrighteous parents mean one is doomed to live apart from God. Each person makes his or her own decision about accepting the salvation and life offered through Jesus Christ. So just because you came from a bad background, everybody in and out of jail, love to rob and steal, fight, cussing, drugs, drinking, having a bunch of babies, that don't mean you have to do that. Okay? Because some people tend to think that, well, this is how it is. Like once I remember I had a student in my class who was acting out one day, and I just asked her a question. I was like, well, why every day you come in here, you always acting out? You don't want to do your work. You don't want to listen to me. Why? And the child stated to me, what's the point? Nobody in my family got a high school diploma. And I was like, wow, this is why she was doing what she was doing. And you know what I told her? I said, well, you gonna be the first. And guess what? She was the first. She was the first. She broke that cycle. But looking at her surroundings, there was no hope. There was no hope. And so you never know what people are thinking or what they are feeling. And you could be the person that can spark them, ignite them, put some fire into them to say, you know what, you can break this cycle. You don't have to live that way. All right. You can be better than your surroundings. And she did it all by herself. All by herself. But it took me to say that to her, to put that thought in her mind that, you know what, I can do it. I can do it. I got this. And she did it. She did it. And she was the first. And I told her, I said, I am so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. Because now after her, look how many other people in the family are going to start at least finishing getting their high school diploma. It worked. All right. So might be you. You can do it. All right. And then, like it said too in the reading, that sometimes some people come from a good background and turn bad. And then the parents, sometimes they feel bad. They feel guilty about it. They feel like they are a failure. Like I provided a good home. I worked hard to provide, and my child is in jail. My child don't want to listen. My child is out here doing all kinds of crazy things. And for a parent, it's embarrassing. It is very embarrassing, and it's very hurtful for a parent to be dealing with something like that, because they know that I didn't raise you like that. Where you get all these ideas from? This wasn't in our household. And, sometimes parents, they get disappointed and they feel, like the blame, like it was their fault, that the way their child turned it out to be. But God is saying, no, it is not your fault for how they turned out. Okay, no, it is not. And so here the question, it says, what is the responsibility of Christian parents and grandparents to influence their children to serve God? What is the responsibility of Christian parents and grandparents? Motivate them, encourage them. All right. Encourage them, expose them to different things. Don't always rely on the teacher or the school system. Y'all can do it. Do family trips, do family outings, teach them, show them different things, talk to them, expose them to different things. Okay. As a responsible Christian parent and a responsible grandparents, help them because it does help. All right. It does have a positive influence on them. So teach them, guide them, lead them down the right path. Okay. And pray that it works out for the good as a responsibility of the parent and the grandparents. Okay. For you to say that I did my part, I did the best that I could, the best of my ability, I did what I could. Okay. And that's all you can do. Sometimes that's it. But some of us sit up there and beat ourselves to death, worrying, and get depressed behind it. But God is saying, just come to him and believe in him. Do your part, pray about it. But at the end of the day, that individual have to be accountable or responsible for their own sins, not you, not you. They're going to be held accountable. All right, so this concludes part 2, principle of individual responsibility. So righteousness rewarded. So those that are doing well, those that are doing an awesome job, living for the Lord, living a holy life, they will be rewarded. They will be rewarded. And then also it talked about the next generation, okay? And they can't just sit there and blame their sins on others. They need to be responsible or held accountable to their own individual sins. All right. So stay tuned now for part 3. The Lord is just. All right. Part 3, the Lord is just.